Brilliant. I think we're almost there. So thank you all for attending tonight for the anxiety reset. So, first of all, why do we need to reset anxiety? Why is that something people would want to do? You can either speak out loud or put it in the chat
Mhm.
box. So Andrew says burnout or overwhelm. To take back control, to feel more calm. I like those. It's not good for you, so why not get rid of it? A good one, Warren. Lynn says, I want to be calmer in social situations. So, Warren says it's not good for you. Is anxiety always not good for us?
I think
D-
sometimes it can possibly serve a function, and it's certainly developed evolutionarily because there's situations where you need to be ready to leg it or to fight or whatever. But I think for most of us, anxiety is inappropriate at the time, and that's why we feel we need to get calmer and take back control.
yeah. Everybody agree with Chris on that one? Depends on the level. Yeah, so anxiety is interesting. Anxiety is a natural part of our mental health system. And if we're sort of walking down the road and a big dog jumps out of us, we want to get anxious. We want to go into fight or flight to deal with that situation. And that's perfectly normal. But one of the rules that neuroscientists says recently, I'm just admitting a few more, neuroscientists said recently, anxiety can become a habit. Whether we go through some trauma or we stay in that stressed, anxious state for way too long, what happens in the brain is we fire that electricity along neural pathways into the amygdala, but a few things can happen. It can either become a habit because of trauma, or if we sit and talk about it again and again and go over it again and again, then it just keeps looping. It just keeps becoming that, and then it becomes worse, and that's when we get problems. And then there's loads of other issues with anxiety because then it messes up the digestive system and the immune system, and it can really sort of put us at risk or burn us out quickly, help us to age faster. So anxiety is natural, but when it becomes a problem, when it becomes a habit, that's when it becomes a problem. So, how does anxiety affect everybody here? It's interesting that different people have anxiety in different ways. How do you experience it?
I think mine became a habit.
Think so.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it becomes a habit. But what are the physical symptoms or the mental symptoms of anxiety? Why is it a problem for us?
Uncomfortable.
Yeah, Brent says it's exhausting to have those mental processes running all the time.
Drains you.
Yeah, can drain
But
you,
soon
racing,
doing what you have got.
overthinking, debilitating for some, sweating, feeling sick, agitated, says Chris. Knots in the stomach. And it's really interesting as a therapist that we never see two people who are exactly the same with anxiety. Is that it can massively swing. Today I had a guy on the phone in a real state, but he doesn't get any physical symptoms. It's all these racing thoughts, these intrusive thoughts that just don't switch off. Knots in the stomach, wanting to avoid things, avoiding people in social situations. And an interesting thing we see in the UK is that people go and get diagnosed And it's funny that the NHS has a lot of different types of anxiety, but usually the way that we deal with it is usually the same, but it depends on the symptoms of what we need to do. So one of the things we're noticing lately is that more and more people seem to be experiencing anxiety. Why do you think that is? Why are more and more people experiencing anxiety?
It's the society we're living in as well. Isn't
In what sort of way?
people and too many people judging and mm,
Be a marketing trick, I guess.
finance.
Sorry, what did you say there, Warren?
It could be a marketing trick. So, in other words, we're being told that anxiety is a real thing and it's being blown out of proportion, and that's how we react to it. Maybe.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view, in that sometimes, not getting into conspiracy theories, but we've seen where drug companies have created a drug and then created the problem or a diagnosis. And yes, I think sometimes it's normal to feel anxious, but especially in children, they seem to really sometimes shut down just with the slightest bit of anxiety. I'm not saying it's not real, but yes, definitely it could be that there's a push there. Um,
I believe we talk about it more, so it has become more acceptable to have anxiety. And maybe there is a part of it that is somewhat contagious. I'm anxious, or my mother was anxious, so
And
it's okay. It's normal for me to be having anxiety.
my father was as well.
that's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So some good comments here. Always rushing to do things. So yes, we're kind of always under a pressure to get things done. A stressful world with a lot of pressure. And yeah, the government keeping us in a state of fear. There's a lot of negative media and news that's got to, the way that it's hitting people. Social media influence. Now that's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of younger women, and now it's starting to happen with guys as well, is that they're expected to look a certain way and be a certain way and have certain things in order to be happy. So social media is pushing us all the time. But I think we had that before with advertising, which is still there. Social media, social media. Yeah. Could there be any other causes of anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, it was trauma from being involved in politics. I got involved in politics. I stood to be a councillor, and I did that for a few years. But it was during the midst of what's now known as the Labour anti-Semitism crisis, and through interactions with other people, friends or people I thought were friends, it became incredibly stressful and ended up with me having like a mini breakdown essentially. And I've had anxiety ever since then, so it can be a trauma response as well. I mean.
Yeah, trauma certainly can cause anxiety very, very quickly, but then also being in high pressure, stressful situations can also cause an awful lot of issues. The other one that we're finding, yeah, okay. So telling yourself negative things, well, sometimes that's a symptom of anxiety, in that we have a lot of negative thoughts. And then we're constantly telling ourselves we're reprogramming the brain with negative thoughts. We start to believe it. Working from home. Now that's interesting. Some people found working from home an awful lot easier, and other people find it really difficult. I've got a neighbor who can't work from home. He has to drive into work to do what he needs to do. But I quite like having a nice safe space where I can work from. Yeah. So Lynn says, for me, I have anxiety around people, mentally and physically hurt by all types of different people in my childhood. So yeah, we learn not to trust them. Self-talk, auto negative thoughts, working from home. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons why we can have anxiety. Now, the one thing that we see is that it's not just mental health. It can also be our biology. There's lots of different studies coming out to say now that if our gut biome's not right, that can cause anxiety issues. A lack of nutrition can cause that sort of problem, and that's become a lot bigger now because people are eating an awful lot more processed food. Just this afternoon, I caught a podcast where they were talking about in the 60s was when women started to go out to work an awful lot more. And because of that, they weren't making fresh food every day, and people slowly moved into more convenience type foods. And I definitely saw that with my mum, is that when she went back out to work, when we got to a certain age, there was more and more sort of processed and pre-made food was brought in. But the relationship between gut biome, candida, and especially serotonin. Now, this is really interesting. Our bodies produce serotonin to help us feel relaxed and melatonin to help us to sleep properly. But if there's any problems with the gut, if there's any food intolerances, digestive issues, gut biome's out, if vitamins or minerals are low, it can stop serotonin from being produced. And it's very common that we see people who've been through every other type of therapy, and then when we get them tested, that can cause a problem as well. Yeah, a lot of evidence around limited diet and sedentary lifestyles. Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why we can have anxiety. So let's start looking at what are the things we can do. Serotonin is made in the gut, Warren. Yeah, actually, it's interesting. It's made in the gut and it's made in the brain. And there's different arguments about which one it is, but it's both. Mainly it's made in the gut, and that's why they're now calling that the second brain. Okay. So one of the interesting things we see is an awful lot of anxiety sufferers. They go out there and they go to what I'd call traditional types of therapy. And this would be something like CBT, counseling, talking therapies. And sometimes people do this again and again and again. And when they come to see us, they've still got an anxiety problem. Do you all think that sitting and talking about it is the right way forward? So we've got a couple of no's, a no idea. It's like picking a scab and expecting it to heal. That's an interesting one. Yeah, the medics say yes. So from looking at our results, over 95% of the clients we see have been through 2 or 3 rounds of one of those therapies, counseling, CBT, talking therapies. And they come in and say, sometimes it helped to begin with, but then it drifted off. Of course, we're not seeing the clients that it did help, but we're seeing it's not the best thing. And in fact, counseling's own figures, the last time I saw was less than 25% of the people that worked with it found it helped. And one of the explanations for this is the latest neuroscience from the 70s. So again, when we get anxious, we fire electricity along neural pathways into the amygdala. But the more that we do that, the more times we create that pattern, those neural pathways in the brain are rather like wires. They become stronger and stronger until it becomes a habit. Now, this was back in the 70s, but neuroscience then says the more we go over the problem, the more we talk about having anxiety, the more we discuss anxiety, we make those neural pathways stronger. And neuroscience is saying the best way to fix it is that we need to interrupt that pattern when it happens. So when we recognize that anxiety being fired, we need to stop it. And the more times we stop that, that falls to bits. But again, the rules of neuroscience are saying, but we then need to replace it with another behavior because we kind of create a black hole. So the way that we work is that we interrupt that anxiety, but then we teach you to move into a new positive, confident, relaxed state, whatever it is you want to choose. And by practicing that one, the more we do that, that gets stronger. And this is why normally in 4 to 6 weeks, we totally eliminate it for 99% of the clients we see. Whereas some people talk about this year after year after year, and it gets worse and worse. And that's an interesting analogy in that there's two different ways of dealing with the same problem. Sometimes sitting down and talking to people and being understood is a major benefit. Because if you're there and you don't know anybody else with the same situation, you feel very alone and lost. But if you can find other people around you that have got it, that can be helpful. But then for other people, being around depressed, negative people all the time actually makes the situation worse. And it is interesting that there's an awful lot of Facebook groups for anxiety and depression. And people just seem to talk about symptoms all the time, and it doesn't seem to help. So the way that we look at it is we give you strategies in order to deal with this, to rewire how the brain works. And there's lots of books out there now. I think one's called Rewire Your Anxious Brain, which is quite a good one, that just basically says by taking on a new behavior and repeating it, it makes an awful lot of changes. So I want you to think just for a second, instead of feeling anxious in future, how would you rather feel? But we need this answer in a positive frame. I don't want you to say less anxious. What would be the opposite of being anxious? What would you like to be instead?
Confident.
Confident. Good one.
Calm and collected.
Calm and collected. Comfortable. Calm.
Positive.
Calm and indifferent. Positive. Happy yet and confident. Calm. Yeah, that's interesting. So you can go into a therapy session and you can spend most of that time talking about the problems and how it makes you feel, or you could be spending that time working to how you want to be instead. Does that make sense? We put that energy into something positive rather than putting it into something negative. And that's kind of the difference with using hypnosis, NLP, EFT, is that we're working towards an end goal, but a lot of people I meet don't even have any goals, so they don't know where they're going. So here's the first question for you. What is it that you're all doing every day or every week to look after your mental health?
Meditating.
Meditation. Good one.
I'm doing hypnotherapy every day.
Good. Gym, meditation, exercise. Excellent. Trying to learn to relax more. Deep breathing. Writing in a journal, getting out in nature, both very, very good. Running, meditating, calm up for sleep stories. Gratitude, and that's interesting. Gratitude, when we practice gratitude, we're focusing on positives rather than negatives. Avoiding toxic people. It's not always easy, but it is quite a good thing to do. Quite often as people get older, I've been through this myself, as my parents got older, we had to kind of learn to protect ourselves from all the negativity that was coming in while still taking care of them. Avoiding doom scrolling, a good one. Meditating, gratitude book, grounding, excellent. Swim and meditate. Breathing techniques, very, very good. Setting boundaries and protecting time. Saying no, that's a major one. It's very easy to get pulled into everybody else's things. The Power of Positive Thinking. That's a great book, definitely. Reiki, yes. Love Reiki. Laughing. Yes, there's a whole type of laughter therapy. I thought it was the daftest thing, but when I tried it, I loved it. So yes, we need to be spending some time doing something positive to look after our mental health, whether we've got mental health issues or not. I think everybody should be doing that. It's good that more and more schools are starting to bring in meditation. It's a nice way to do that. So there's a nice little exercise that I'm going to share with you today. But there's three things that we need to do really to be looking after our mental health, especially if we want to eliminate the problems. And the first one is we need to become aware of how we represent our mental health in our head. Most people just feel awful, but they don't really know how or why or understand it. The second thing we need to do is to learn how to interrupt or stop that. As I talked about before, when that electricity is firing, we need to stop that. So we need to interrupt it. In NLP, we call this a pattern interrupt, which is such a big thing. And then the third one is we need to develop a new mental state and practice and then put a little bit of time into it every day. And it's amazing that if we used functional MRI scanners before and after with something like this little exercise I'm going to show you, you can see a different brain. It's like there's a totally different personality in there. And again, they've known this since the 70s. And what we see is when people get in and work with this, is that most people go and eliminate the problems, but they don't just sort out the problems. They then get a load of tools that they can use to then go on and do so much better in life. And we've seen loads of people who go on and start a business, get a new relationship, get a pay rise, do so much better just by learning what's going on in here. And I've got to be honest, do you all know my story? No. Okay, I'll go through and just tell you. So at the age of 16, the NHS wanted to class me as disabled. I'd had 10 years of severe anxiety. I had a bad stammer. I had depression, IBS, loads of digestive issues, and life was pretty miserable. And I remember that day that I went to the hospital. My dad, who was a director of a psychiatric hospital, took me for once, and I prayed they were going to give me a pill or something to go on and sort this problem out because it was really awful. I also had asthma. I was having 7 or 8 asthma attacks a day. So on that day, they sat me down and they said, look, we think we need to put you on disability. Don't worry about getting a job. Sit and enjoy watching the telly. And that day, 2 things happened. One was I kind of said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. It had been really miserable. But the other thing that happened was my dad, and I'd never seen this before, my dad absolutely exploded because the medication that we're talking about giving a 16-year-old boy was the sort of stuff that made you shuffle and drool. I was fortunate, I suppose, as a child to spend a lot of time walking around St. Nick's Hospital while my dad was working. And some of the states of people in there and the side effects from those meds were quite awful. So what happened for me was that I just made a decision that day. I didn't know how I was going to do it, that I was going to find a way to sort this problem out. And I went off around the library, and they must have thought I was crazy because I was back in there every 3 or 4 days getting all the books off the psychology shelf, reading everything I could on psychology, counseling. And it was quite depressing because all of these books said you had to find the root cause of the problem. And I went to my mother and said, sorry, I thought somebody was talking.